In the history of salvation, we see the people of God from the very beginning trying to figure out what the will of God was for them, what it meant to them. Why was it that some people suffered so much in this life and others seemed to prosper and suffer so little? One of the explanations, they thought, was if you were a godly person, God would bless you in every way and you would have a good life here. And if you were a sinner, you would get your comeuppance here in this life and things would turn out bad for you even if you had a run of luck for a while. That was one explanation we see coming up over and over in the prayers, in the Hebrew Scriptures, and throughout the history of salvation. But others noted, no, many times the worst possible people seem to be blessed in every way and get away literally with murder. And many of the holiest people suffer from the first moment they're born throughout their lives. And we have in the book of Job the classic response that here's an innocent, just man, and he suffers in every way possible. And they can't figure out why. But they trust in God that there is a why and a reason beyond what we could grasp. But perhaps of all the sufferings in the world that humanity faces, the suffering of a newborn or the suffering of a child is the most poignant, the most heartbreaking, the most challenging to the faith. Years ago, when I was working in a large hospital in Detroit, one of the wards or units that I covered was the pediatric unit. And I would see children come there who were sick, and many would get well, having received important medical attention. Some came in through injuries or illness. Others would come in with a chronic illness that they were born with. Some would live and get better, but other children would die. It's always heartbreaking and sorrowful to see that. It would be heartbreaking for the family, the parents, first of all. But then all of the extended relatives as well. And for the healthcare workers that worked that unit, they would feel a sorrow that their healing skills could not save that child. And even in a short time, they would come to know and love a child, because children have a way of winning over our hearts and our minds very quickly. Whenever I'd go to the pediatric unit, I'd bring a yellow teddy bear with me. The teddy bear gave more pastoral counseling to these kids than I could. And even if they were sick, they still would want to play in some way. I remember one little girl had her appendix taken out, and she had all kind of tubes in her, and she's laying in her bed. She was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I said, well, how's it going, honey? She said, okay. I said, is there anything I could do for you? And she said, yeah, could you put me in that wagon? They had these toys in the pediatric unit. And I said, well, I'll see. So I had the nurses put a little mattress in there. She was put in the wagon, still had all the tubes in her. But she was happy, because now being in a wagon, she was playing. Being in bed, she was sick. You know, just the difference. This notion of the suffering of a child. And so that would haunt the human conscience, the human mind, the human soul. And the disciples of Jesus see this man born blind. They say, is this a punishment for sin? Did his parents do something horrible, something terrible, that they were cursed and had their child born blind? Or is this a punishment to the child himself? How could this be, since he started life with this suffering? And Jesus said, we're putting suffering in a different context now. We're putting suffering in a different perspective altogether. This has nothing to do with sin, but with the glory of God and a manifestation of God's power. And Jesus cures the man born blind. He doesn't know anything about theology, but he knows generally about the religion that he was born into. And so when he's questioned by the rabbis what happened, he answers them. And he said, I don't know too much about my religion, but I know one thing. It's never been heard of before that someone like myself, born blind, recovered his sight. And I know this much, that if this man wasn't a prophet, if he was steeped in sin, he would never have given me this gift or been able to. And they had this long dialogue back and forth. He still is just at the beginning phase. He only knows one thing. Christ healed him of his blindness, and that was enough to know. Well, all of us that are born into this world have physical limitations of being biological creatures. None of us will get out of this world alive. Even if we're born perfect, we know we're imperfect. We know that eventually our biological functions break down and we'll have to face death. But the question will be, will we have lived our lives walking in the light and being a light to others? Or will we have embraced darkness and encouraged others to do the same? Will we be children of the light so that we'll be ready to enter into the very light of God? In this Lenten season, we take stock of our lives. We say, we don't know how much longer we have in this world, but how could I increase the depth and breadth of my loving? How can I let go of those vices that rob me ultimately of joy? How could I forgive the unforgivable in those actions in my lives, people who have hurt us? How could I forgive them even if they're not seeking forgiveness, so that I may not be bitter? How could I ask for forgiveness from those that I have really and truly hurt due to my own sinfulness? How can I be more virtuous tomorrow than I am today? These are the big questions. The good news is that the Christ who cured that blind man has watched over us from the moment we took our first breath in this life. And He'll be with us as we breathe our last breath in this life. And at each step of the way, He has been there loving us and encouraging us and telling us we could be heroes of our own lives. We could be strong in virtue even if we're weak in our bodies. And because of that, we could be counted as one of His children, one of His disciples, one of His brothers and sisters. And because of that, even in this Lenten season, we could have a momentary sense of joy and happiness to rejoice in the Lord in His forgiving power.